Yeah, and we're live. Welcome to another episode of the First Division podcast. And today, I know I haven't had a chance to upload another video. This past couple months have been completely crazy with work schedule and so on. But I wanted to, I wanted to go on here, and what I've started reading was I started reading a collection of short stories about a collection of short stories by a Russian writer. His name is Anton Chekhov. And for those of you who don't know who Anton Chekhov is, he was uh, he created photographic kind of descriptions of what life was, or at that time in Russian history, to create these short stories. Now, many of these short stories that I've been reading, they have different types of moods and atmospheres, and most of them are kind of depressing. Some are kind of sad. Some are about love. Some are about awkward situations, and some of them are about getting to kind of deep into how people react to certain situations. Uh, Even if he's kind of writing in the abstract, he's still trying to capture that human characteristics, that human spirit of how people actually interact with one another. And when you read some of these stories, you could tell that even though that the times that when he wrote, he wrote these in like the 19th century, and so for example, he was writing these stories in the 1880s, 1890s. And even though it was such a long time ago, he was those same kind of feelings come up with people today. And he really vividly sets the scenes and really gives you a sense of kind of building up the characters, building up the scene, uh, and really just like getting you to kind of delve deeper into the psychology of the human mind and of humans, and um, how people deal with certain types of losses in their life, or if they gained successes in their lives and things like that. And so I'm reading this book with a collection of his short stories, and it's called War Number Six and Other Stories. And the one that really, there's all of them are, I like all of them so far, but the one that I really captured my kind of attention, the one that I really like, I like, and it's called Typhus. And in Typhus, the story is about this guy who he's taking a train back from, and he's taking a train trip, and he's sharing the, well, if you know anything about the trains, like if, for example, if you've ever taken the train, there's either uh you can either ride in like private cars, for example, and you get your own private uh chair. You can have your in it, which can fold out into a bed. And like, for example, one time I took a train trip across the U.S. on the Amtrak, and I, I took what was called a sleeper car. And in the sleeper car it was a private car where you had a private glass door that was sliding open. I don't remember if you could lock it or not, but it was private. And the two kind of bench seats that were facing each other could fold down, and you can make yourself a bed. And that's why it was called the sleeper car, and you can make your own private bed. And um what was nice, and it's a little bit more hygienic, was some of the sleeper cars I know on some of the older Amtrak um cross country trains, they have like the toilet is actually in the room that you're sleeping in. And this one was a little bit more modern, where you had to go to a separate shower area and a separate toilet area. I think it's a little bit more hygienic. Not to mention the smell would be like terrible or horrendous if you had to be in a place where the toilet was in your room. I don't know who designed that, but that doesn't seem like a very good uh, design for making a kind of a sleeper car. But anyway, so this guy in his short story Typhus, this gentleman is taking a train trip back home to go see his mom and his sister, and so he's in the car with this gentleman, and the gentleman is he strikes up a conversation. Well, the gentleman strikes up a conversation with him, and he isn't really receptive to the conversation. He chit chats a little bit, but then the guy keeps talking and talking and talking, and he's getting this, and he starts to develop a headache, and he starts to resent the passenger that he's with because the guy sitting across from him on the train is just talking. It reminds me of something like, for example, if you ever seen the film Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, it's something similar where Steve Martin is on the plane, and he's going back. He's flying from New York to Chicago for Thanksgiving, and on the plane, I think it's on the plane. Yeah, on the plane, he sits down. Steve Martin, his character, sits down in the plane. He's getting comfortable. He's getting ready to take the flight, and all of a sudden, John Candy comes, and his so the characters' names are Neil and Del. Del is played by John Candy. Del comes and sits down next to Steve Martin, and during the flight, during the takeoff and landing, you see this couple of scenes where John Candy or Del is just chatting away at Neil, and Neil is completely uninterested in what Del has to say, and he totally tunes him out. That's what happens similar in this story. So the gentleman is sitting there. He's getting a headache. He's starting to get sick, and he gets sick, but he didn't get sick from the conversation. He got sick. I think he was already sick, but because he was constantly being talked to, and the dialogue was, droning on and on and on, his symptoms got worse. So he ends up sleeping on the train, and when he wakes up, he's at his hometown station. He gets up, he walks towards his mom and sister's home, and he's feverish. He's got a headache. He's drowsy. He's almost about to pass out, and he eventually does pass out. And doctors come and see him. He's laid up in bed. He's sleeping, and what's interesting is that during that time, he's kind of fading in and out of sleep, and he's on the verge of death. I think how I interpret the story, I think he's about to die because he's getting weaker and weaker. He doesn't want to eat. He doesn't recognize anybody, but he kind of has these moments where he has these interactions with the doctor, and the doctor is trying to soothe him and cure him. And so finally, I think if I remember correctly, it's about 10 days to about a week. He wakes up, and the doctor's there, the same doctor that started trying to cure him earlier in the story. The same doctor comes, and he lets him know that, hey, you survived the disease that you were suffering from, which is typhus. And so the man, he was so happy that he was able to survive such a thing, and this ordeal and his disease. And he was over ecstatic, and he wanted to celebrate. And so he ordered some champagne, some caviar, some he wanted like a fancy dinner, and he was overjoyed and overwhelmed that he was able to overcome his uh, disease and be cured of typhus. Now, unbeknownst to him, the reason why he was coming back home was he wanted to see his sister, see that she was about ready to go to college and or to university and get accepted to university, and that's the real reason why he came. And his sister was preparing for the university, and well, when he recovered, he woke up and ordered all these things, these fancy things like the champagne and the caviar. And he notices, and this is where Anton Chekhov really sets the scene, because he pivots from a very kind of like a happy moment for this gentleman. He should be ecstatic that he survived this disease, because I'm not sure at that time whether there was some kind of cure for typhus. So this is where Anton Chekhov sets the scene. He tells us that once he's ecstatic, he sees that his mother is crying, right? So he juxtaposes it, right? He brings you up to a moment of, yeah, this is great, this is good, we should be happy that this gentleman survived. But now he paints this picture, and he says to us, and he asks the question, well, what was the cost of it? Which he doesn't quite reveal, right? So I think he at that instant, right, he doesn't quite reveal why why is the mother crying. So then an ensuing dialogue ensues, right? So he asks his mom, like, why are you crying? Why are you sad? I'm alive. You should be happy that your son was able to live through such a terrible disease. And of course she is a little bit happy she is happy that her son is alive. But this is where it kind of takes a dark turn, I would say, and I'll explain to you why it's a dark turn in a minute. But it takes a dark turn because she says, yes, I'm happy that you survived. And when the conversation keeps continuing, he says, well, where's my sister? I hope that her exams are going well. And she goes, well, I wouldn't know about that because we had to bury her 2 days ago. I think it was 2 or 3 days ago, while you were still recovering, and you didn't know because you were recovering. You were kind of unconscious, kind of feverish, and wasn't aware of your surroundings. And you didn't know that 2 or 3 days ago she had died, and that we had to have a funeral for her. And he says, or he asks, well, why? He was kind of in shock. He was shocked by this news, right? Because his sister was young, 17, 18, 19, going to university or wanting to go to university. And the mom reveals the piece of information that's going to really, really shock his system. And he says, and she says to him, well, she died because you gave her the disease that you are cured from. So that puts him into an awkward position because first of all, he didn't know he had typhus. He didn't know how contagious this disease was. So it puts him in a mindset where he thinks, now, like, did I inadvertently, so is my happiness short-lived? Or I didn't want to, kill my sister, or I didn't want to kill anybody else. I just wanted to get rid of my disease, whatever that disease may have been. So this news shocks him because Yes, he survived, but at what cost? The cost was his sister's life, because his sister caught typhus from him, and her system couldn't handle it, and she died. So because the news was so shocking to him, he didn't know how to react properly to this. So what he did was he left, moved to his own apartment, and about a week or so later, uh, the thought of what had happened really kicked in. So now his emotions are really on overdrive, right? So he uh he didn't, he still didn't know how to react to it, but then he walked up to the window, he banged his head on the window, and he said, I'm ruined, I don't know how I can be happy from this point on. And then the short story ends. So what he did was, so spoiler alerts for, if I, reviewed, if I went over the plot, and this is again, this is just from what I remember of reading. If there are any details out there where I may have been wrong, or if I didn't get it quite correct, and maybe if you have a different opinion than me, please leave it down in the comments below and tell me what you think about this short story. I think it really, I think the short story is really good to uh, kind of see how some people's happiness uh, is caused by. I think it shows how some people's happiness are caused on other people's misery. So yeah, he was happy that he was cured. Yes, he wanted to celebrate, and he wanted to show that sometimes. I think Anton Chekhov wanted to show that at sometimes your happiness could be uh, off of other people's miseries, and that you I think it was what he was trying to convey is a sense of humbleness. Be humble for what you have. Be uh he didn't want you to be over ecstatic about good news, or uh don't take, your life as the most important thing, or that your action, or he's saying that your actions really affect the people around you. So even if that action is inadvertently on you, because he didn't describe how that person caught typhus, he didn't describe how that sickness came to be, but I think he's saying that your happiness and your life is interconnected with people around you, and that the actions that you take, or the decisions that you make, or the things that you do and say really have real life consequences and real life uh, sort of effects on other people's lives. And so I think that's that's what I've taken from this story. I could be completely wrong. My interpretation of this story could be completely off. I would really like to hear from all of the listeners, from all of you, if you have your opinion on his short story. I mean, I really like it. I really like the characters that he brings in some of his short stories. I like the situations that he talks about, and the different dialogues that he has, between his characters. I think that the way he portrays the characters, the way he outlines the stories, gives you a picture of what these people are, excuse me, going through in their lives, and how to bring that not just he doesn't just bring the words on the paper, and you're just reading a story and it's in the abstract and you can't get any kind of sense, oh, what is really happening between people. I mean, he takes, it may be fiction, sure, but he's taking those fictional characters and giving them real personalities, and really showing what life must have been like in Russia at that time, and what people are really what were people going through at that time period, and really bringing out those people's emotions and dialogues and thoughts that jump from the page. and you get a real sense of what these people were like. And I think, and I think the way he takes not just ordinary people. His short stories. There's a one called where there's a couple of princesses in there, and people that are, you know, you know, aristocrats, and they. So all walks of life are represented in his short stories. So if I could give you a recommendation, I'd say check out Anton Chekhov. It's a real, his stories are really, really good, and really interesting to read. And I will keep on reading this book, and I will update you on on another episode of when when I finish the book, and when I finish all the stories. And I'd like to talk about a couple of stories in a future podcast. And I'll come back with maybe another book review, or another podcast, another view when when another subject comes up. So thank you, and thank you for listening. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification. Coming back at you with another episode, and peace.